Having already proved their talent with the highest-rated Sonic game in 25 years, it should come as no surprise that many of the same developers would strike gold once again. Penny's big breakaway is a linear 3D platformer with a highly nuanced movement system that, barring some technical shortcomings, only gets better with time. Make no mistake, this is not a Sonic game, or even particularly Sonic-like on the surface level, but that's precisely what makes it so special. Utilizing an intuitive dual-stick control system that I don't think I've seen since The Wonderful 101, Penny's movement is entirely reliant on her magical yo-yo. This allows her to dash or swing in any direction, grapple onto specific objects, and ride down slopes to gain momentum. That last function is of particular importance, as Penny has a unique limitation compared to Sonic and his other indie influences. She is painfully slow on foot, heavily incentivizing mastery of her yo-yo to build and maintain speed. There's not much instant gratification here. Even her spin dash equivalent isn't very powerful. If you want speed, you'll need to earn it. It's the thoroughly analog nature of Penny's movement that makes it so appealing to me. Controlling the yo-yo is never a simple binary action. Not only can it be aimed in any direction around Penny, but its swing function is equally versatile, allowing the player to redirect their speed in any direction while mid-air. With enough momentum, Penny can fling herself backwards, or perform full 360-degree revolutions like her own personal loop-de-loop. Even riding her yo-yo downhill, clearly her most Sonic-like tool, is about maintaining and redirecting momentum. Unlike Sonic, Penny doesn't accelerate much from passively traveling downhill from the pull of gravity. But if she swings into a roll, or drops downwards onto the steepest point of a slope, she will carry that momentum forward into a substantial boost of speed. The timing is tight, but that's exactly what makes it so rewarding. Simply put, controlling Penny is sublime, and the relatively low amount of automation lets the player's success feel truly earned. I imagine that many Sonic fans familiar with his recent 3D titles will find this quite off-putting, as they will be held accountable for their mistakes and can't reach maximum speed with a single button press. Without the threat of failure, there isn't much room for satisfaction. Stages are thankfully lacking in overly automated set pieces, and those that do exist can usually be bypassed. The whirling wafer power-up will rocket Penny high into the air and then drift downwards very slowly, but it can be instantly cancelled into a free fall, providing an opportunity to redirect her falling speed into a horizontal fling across the stage. The same can be said of these Sonic-esque flying paper sections, where the player is free to jump off at any time and forge their own path through the air. A lesser game would have made these sequences completely automated and overly restrictive, removing any opportunity for players to express themselves with high-risk, high-reward maneuvers. These prolonged zipline segments are something of an outlier, since Penny can't jump off the line until reaching the predetermined endpoint. This is tolerable when they only last a few seconds, but the lengthier ones can really break the pace. Thankfully, many of them can be skipped entirely through some mid-air launches with the yo-yo, or by attaching to the line closer to the end. Again, a lesser game wouldn't have made this an option in the first place. This does, however, reveal an under-the-hood issue with how the yo-yo soft-locks onto grapple points. To once again borrow some brilliantly explained terminology from Matthew Matosis, this is a perfect example of fuzzy context, from his excellent video about context sensitivity. I've had many occasions where I've attempted to dash or swing away from an object that can be grappled, but the yo-yo's automatic soft lock forces me to attach to it instead. The opposite isn't uncommon either, where I do want to attach to a nearby object, but Penny will just throw out the yo-yo. It's difficult to distinguish between two context-sensitive grapple points in close proximity to each other. I'm flicking the right analog stick to the left to try and break these light bulbs, but the automated soft lock frequently magnetizes to the electrified poles in front of me, overriding my intended input and often making me take damage. Penny typically throws out her yo-yo in a radius parallel to the ground, but these context-sensitive grapple points are often vertically above her. In what I can assume is an attempt to avoid players accidentally attaching to these points while grounded, the level design usually places them just high enough above the floor so that the player must jump first to become vertically aligned. This doesn't do much to prevent accidental soft-locking, however, when so much of the yo-yo's movement is performed in mid-air, leading to many situations like this where I've attached to a nearby object I wasn't even aiming at. When close to these objects, the player is conditioned to expect that the yo-yo's core moveset of dashing and swinging is no longer available to them. This is the problem with fuzzy context. The player can no longer trust that their intent will be correctly carried out by the character. You can clearly see that even when the soft lock reticule hasn't fully closed in, and when I aim the yo-yo away from the object above me, I'm still magnetized upwards onto the rope. Even when standing on the ground and the soft lock indicator is obviously visible on a nearby object, the yo-yo will not attach unless I'm in the air. Or at least, that seems to be the case most of the time. If the analog stick had any sense of 3D space, such strong magnetism wouldn't be necessary, as players could manually aim the yo-yo upwards to reach these points themselves. Since that's not currently an option, there is no way for me to communicate the desire of my inputs. In this instance, I was trying to dash forward, but since this rope was directly above me, the game incorrectly assumed I wanted to grapple upwards. This behavior is inconsistent enough that I'd argue the softlock graphic is blatantly unreliable, and should be ignored when attempting to perform complex actions. I understand that some kind of softlock or grapple magnetism is necessary, otherwise the game would be expecting the player to attach to objects with an unreasonable amount of precision. But then we're forced to deal with fuzzy context. The only clear, albeit clunky, solution would be if attaching to grapple points was bound to an exclusive button. Since both the left and right shoulders and triggers currently perform the same actions, jumping and rolling, maybe an optional advanced mode could allow players to bind one of the triggers to their grapple attach command. This way, players are still able to simultaneously move Penny with the left stick, aim the yo-yo with the right stick, jump and roll with one of the shoulders and triggers, and have control over when they attach to grapple points on the opposite trigger. All of this could be achieved without having to remove their thumbs and fingers from any of the other sticks, buttons, or triggers, maintaining the established brilliance of the existing control scheme. Perhaps this was considered during development and deemed too complicated for most players, and the soft locking was accepted as a necessary evil. After all, these are a very common inclusion in 3D games. But if we don't draw attention to these systemic flaws, it's unlikely anything will be done to address them in the future. Super Mario Odyssey has essentially the same problem, although a bit less intrusive. When facing an object that Mario can capture with his hat, even when the hat icon appears on top of it, Mario will automatically capture a physically closer object directly behind him instead. When even Nintendo can't rectify this, I can't complain too much that an independent team making their first 3D game didn't solve it themselves. While we're on the subject of technical faults, I may as well address the blue hedgehog in the room. The game has bugs. Quite a lot of them. Performance, however, is extremely solid. I've run the entire game at native 4K resolution at 120 frames per second without any noticeable hiccups, likely thanks to Evening Star's proprietary Star engine, specifically designed to reduce the bloat of photorealistic rendering workflows present in existing game engines like Unreal and Unity. This is all fantastic, but it doesn't quite lessen the blow of getting stuck inside geometry, falling through the floor, or flying unexpectedly out of bounds. There are a plethora of unfortunate issues I've run into during my playtime, which have managed to cloud my own judgment of the game's quality. I should clarify that some of these may have already been patched since the footage was originally recorded, like when Penny would get caught in geometry, but I can confirm from my own testing that all of these other glitches are still present in the game as of version 1.2. For example, I've jumped off those previously mentioned flying paper trails to try massive shortcuts with the yo-yo. During most of these attempts, the yo-yo dash and swing doesn't activate, and I fall to my death. After numerous attempts with inconsistent results, I still cannot tell if this is somehow my fault or just another glitch. There are moments where I feel like my steering input isn't being read at all while riding the yo-yo, although I believe this is related to the initial speed gained upon activating it on a slope, but again, I haven't had very consistent results. It usually takes a moment for the rotation to begin, conveyed when Penny starts noticeably turning, but then I've had other times where it seems to work immediately. Trying to ride over water or lava can be needlessly difficult when the yo-yo ride action doesn't trigger, even though the sound effect can still be heard after pressing the button. I'm willing to take some blame for this, but it should be noted that the timing for re-riding the yo-yo when this close to the ground is extremely tight, as it seems Penny will not respond to the ride input until a brief period of time after dismounting. Again, this is partially on me, but I've lost speed many times from having to bunny hop instead of riding the yo-yo, because the input doesn't register in time before Penny touches the floor, even when repeatedly tapping both triggers simultaneously. Penny's drop shadow will disappear when she's too high above the ground, removing any certainty over her position in midair. This is a pretty simple feature commonly available in most other 3D platformers, so it's confusing to see it in such a state upon the game's launch. Penny has a general issue interacting with slopes and curves of any size while on foot. She'll start tumbling around aimlessly, but still moves in accordance to the player's input, making it very unclear what's actually going on. This issue was partially remedied in the version 1.2 patch, but I'm not confident in saying that it's been removed completely. There's another random glitch where Penny gets sent flying backwards after exiting from a zipline. Now imagine my frustration when this happens after I wasn't even trying to attach to the zipline in the first place, thanks to the aforementioned fuzzy context. My sympathy always lies with the developers in regards to issues like these, as I imagine Evening Star are even more frustrated by the game's current state than I am. Bugs take time to squash, time is money, and games take a lot of money to make. I'm not excusing these glitches, because they do need to be addressed as soon as possible, but I don't want to imply that I think poorly of the developers because of this. It's appreciated that the development focus was clearly spent on crafting the movement and level design, but the presentation has suffered as a result. The soundtrack is unsurprisingly fantastic, but other aspects of the sound design feel neglected. Some cutscenes lose their impact from a lack of sound effects, not to mention the letterboxed borders occasionally failing to cover the entire range of the screen. Boss fights end abruptly and anticlimactically, leaving an awkward feeling of, oh, that's it? Penny's victory pose will often break as well, leading to strange outcomes like this. When I first launched the game, I restarted it several times thinking that something was wrong. Sound effects appeared to be playing out of sync with the cutscene animation, and the background music was so quiet that I couldn't hear it through my surround sound speakers, leaving the world feeling dead and empty. I have to guess the intent was to contrast against the first true level, when T-Lope's bouncy score finally comes crashing in, but it wasn't a strong first impression that I thought the game was broken. Cutscene animation is quite lacking too. I don't mind the static posing and lack of voiced dialogue, but the limitations of the models are quite distracting. Penny's face has noticeable vertex pinching during particular expressions, made more apparent by her very shiny, almost matte cap skin material. The 2D cutscenes are fine in stills, but the simple animatic style movement pulls me out of the experience. Otherwise, the game looks and sounds fantastic. Penny's character design is cute and appealing, and the contours of her hat and hair help to signify her current orientation while moving, not unlike that of Sonic's quills. The environment's saturated, soft color palette is very striking, although the different worlds have a difficult-to-articulate homogeneity that I can't quite ignore. Forgive me for another Sonic comparison, but I feel it's appropriate here. Sonic zones, especially the ones in Mania, have a palpable atmospheric quality that sets each stage apart with clear, unique theming, sometimes even between two acts of the same zone. I don't want to sound too harsh here. I'm aware of the two games' differing production environments, not to mention the added complexity of the third dimension, but I still believe Penny would have benefited from a stronger sense of identity across each stage, even if only in their music. The 10th world plays a brilliant remix of the theme from World 1, almost like an Act 2 rearrangement that you'd hear in a Sonic game. It would have gone a long way to have more themes like this spread across the stages of each world, instead of listening to the same track every time. If a trade-off had to be made to accommodate more variety in the core stages, it should have been from reworking or removing the boss fights, as they're easily the low point of the game. It's jarring when most of the bosses force the player to stand around waiting for the reveal of an arbitrary weak point, in a game that otherwise heavily incentivizes proactive, agile movement. This is why the game's best bosses are just platforming gauntlets while racing to the finish line. Even the standard levels don't feature many enemies, letting the player focus on platforming instead of any shoehorned combat mechanics. Replaying the game through Time Attack is what I've personally enjoyed the most, partially because it skips over the boss fights and the time-wasting quick-time events after every stage. Aesthetically speaking, it suits Penny's nature as a performer to jump onto a tiered platform and entertain the crowd with her yo-yo, but for the player, it's just an annoyance. Reaching the highest point of the tower is a great flagpole-style skill check, but I wonder about the potential for a more speed-focused final challenge, better fitting Penny's momentum-based gameplay. I'm immediately reminded of how Sonic Advance 2 ended each stage with a tiered track on the floor. The more momentum the player has when crossing the finish line, the further Sonic will go, and the more points they'll receive. Not since Sonic Generations has a platformer made me this interested in attempting to complete every stage as fast as possible, although there are still some features that I think Penny, and other games, could benefit from copying. I've always loved how Generations would display your current time per each checkpoint against your previous record. This allowed the player to mentally compartmentalize their speedrun, and offered more feedback throughout each run of the level. If you were already behind after the very first checkpoint, then you knew there was room for improvement, and could choose to restart sooner without wasting an already failed attempt at the full stage. It's still a missed opportunity that Generations never received any kind of online race mode, with no such feature announced for the upcoming remaster, but the 30-second trials were a truly genius compromise. Players had half a minute to make it as far as possible through a stage, planting a signpost with their profile picture upon completion, offering a clear visual reference for their friends to compete against. Afterwards, you could continue to explore the stage to try and find where your friends had gotten to, and hopefully decipher what route they took to achieve it. The key to its success, however, was how the player could continue moving in the air after the timer expired, incentivizing clever last-minute aerial tricks to get as far as possible before finally touching the ground. I've longed to see such a feature return in the Sonic series, and it would have suited Penny's momentum-based swinging perfectly. It's possible that my drive to time attack Penny's levels may simply be that speedrunning fast-paced 2D platformers, particularly those with layered level parts like Sonic, requires a huge degree of trial and error memorization. To perform optimally, players must make leaps of faith to overcome upcoming terrain that wasn't even visible on screen at the time of input. I still love these games, but I think it's this limitation of how much space can be concurrently presented on screen that makes me less inclined to speedrun them compared to any 3D counterparts. Pizza Tower is a rare exception, as it benefits from a fairly zoomed-out camera, with linear levels designed explicitly for speedrunning and maintaining a consistent combo. The player character also becomes near invincible when running at high speeds, and can seamlessly scale walls without coming to a dead stop, supporting their flow through the stage. Celeste has an even larger field of view relative to the size of its playable character, and often constructs challenges around a single screen. In the areas where the camera scrolls with the player, it will often pull back to provide a better view. These techniques are all compensating for the lack of directional perspective inherent to side-scrollers. Shifting to 3D alleviates much of this burden, but also introduces its own set of problems, some of which I've already discussed. Penny succeeds in embracing the fluidity and expressiveness possible in such a space, as her entire moveset is built around redirecting speed into any 3D trajectory at any time. I sometimes struggle to provide valuable feedback to pieces of art that I thoroughly enjoy, because so many elements of the creative process appear invisible when done successfully. It's easy to identify why a game feels bad, but it's not always easy to explain in detail why it feels good. Sometimes the best thing about a game is what it doesn't do, and the only way to know this is by playing other games that make these mistakes. I've enjoyed my time with other high-speed 3D platformers like Spark the Electric Jester and Roland Rascal, but as titles that are quite clearly emulating a very Sonic-specific experience, they can also develop some unintended shortcomings. In what I assume is an attempt to move away from the automated hallways of recent 3D Sonic titles, their level design can become so sprawling and intertwined that it's visually noisy, obscuring the path forward. When moving at high speed in any game, players need immediate, unambiguous readability of all relevant information at all times. Yet Rascal's opening stage has small springs that share the same color as the decorative flowers scattered across the level. Defunct and Crumble have a more discernible identity than Spark or Rascal, with stronger visual clarity and massive potential for speedrunners, but don't grab me with their visual or musical aesthetics. They almost feel like extremely well-made proof of concepts that could be greatly improved with a larger team of dedicated level designers. Penny's big breakaway sidesteps all of these drawbacks by forging its own path. It's not trying to be like Sonic at face value. It wants to offer a fresh perspective on the momentum-based platformer, utilizing its own creative systems and visual style. Levels are intuitive to explore thanks to strong contrasting colors and clear framing of the camera, letting the player invest all of their focus into flowing through the stage as smoothly as possible. While it may have some boring boss fights, glitches in need of patching, and a simple narrative heavily undermined by stilted presentation, Penny feels like a cohesive, polished, complete experience. A statement of intent about the potential within this genre from the very same people who helped to revive it. By trying not to be just another Sonic game, it manages to recapture the intention behind Sonic's original design ethos. Speed is a reward, earned by skillfully exploiting the thoughtfully crafted level design to build and maintain momentum. I imagine Evening Star don't want their games to be endlessly compared to Sonic, and I truly do apologize for contributing to that, but I still need to make one final point. For Sonic Team, and the Sonic series as a whole, Sonic Mania was a fluke. A rare moment of brilliance, where it felt as if the whole world loved Sonic again. The intensely mediocre Sonic Superstars only served to solidify this, and Sonic Frontiers certainly isn't offering any stronger competition in the realm of 3D. But for the actual developers behind Sonic Mania, for Evening Star, it's clear they were just getting started.